November 20th, 1974. A U.S. Navy commander named Robert Ballinger clips onto a ladder above a hole cut through the most fortified border on Earth. The ceasefire forbids him to carry a weapon. He carries a flashlight instead. Less than 60 seconds after his boots hit the tunnel floor, the wall beside him moves. What they find on the other side of that wall, the dimensions, the drainage, the direction every blast hole points, is going to take South Korean engineers 3 days to fully process. And when they finish processing it, a general is going to sit down in front of a map and realize that this tunnel is not the problem. The problem is the 20 tunnels nobody has found yet, built deeper, built quieter, and built to wait for one specific night. That night has not come. The tunnels are still there. The Korean War did not end. People sometimes forget this. In July of 1953, the United States, China, and North Korea signed an armistice at a village called Panmunjom. South Korea refused to sign. The fight stopped. The war did not. The line where the fighting stopped became the demilitarized zone. 250 kilometers of mountains, paddy fields, and ridge forest, sealed behind 2 parallel fences and somewhere between 1 and 2 million landmines, the exact number unknown because too many records were lost and too many fields were laid by soldiers who did not survive to file the paperwork. Guard posts every few hundred meters, observation towers, acoustic listening stations, sniper hides, dog teams, motion sensor arrays. The South keeps roughly 600,000 soldiers under arms at all times. The North keeps over 1 million. The surface of the DMZ is not a border in the conventional sense. It is a killing floor. Anyone who has ever tried to cross it in numbers, on foot, has died there. Kim Il-sung does not accept that the war is over. He believes the entire peninsula belongs to him. The surface belongs to nobody, which means it belongs, in a strategic sense, to whoever controls what lies underneath it. So, in the early 1970s, in a meeting whose minutes were never declassified and whose participants were never named in any document the South has ever recovered, he gives an order to his frontline commanders. Each of his 10 forward divisions will construct, under conditions of absolute secrecy, no fewer than 2 invasion tunnels beneath the DMZ into South Korean territory, not spy corridors, not exfiltration routes for intelligence operatives. Military invasion infrastructure designed for the rapid forward deployment of armed troops through solid granite and into the rear area of the enemy's defensive line, ready by a date the regime decided not to write down. The order does not specify what happens to officers who fail to execute it. It does not need to. But Ballinger is not crossing the surface. He is below it, in the flat, close dark of a granite passage, and the air smells of wet stone and something electrical. And the rock absorbs sound the way only solid stone can, everything flat, everything near, without echo. And then the wall beside him stops being a wall and becomes pressure and light, and the absence of Robert Ballinger, and Major Nastri is being dragged up the ladder by his collar. And the first American combat death on the Korean peninsula in 5 years is already over before the dust settles. The charge was almost certainly command-detonated from the North Korean side. Someone was watching the southern end of their tunnel and pressed a switch when the Americans walked into range. South Korea contracts a Korean mineral firm and sinks 69 boreholes along the central DMZ in the months that follow. 69 return solid rock. The steam that revealed Tunnel 1 escaped because one section was dug too close to the surface, with a construction error so fundamental that North Korean engineering doctrine was revised to prohibit it within weeks of the discovery. The revised depth specifications are stricter. The new construction guidelines are more precise. The program does not pause to absorb failure. It improves because of it. None of the remaining tunnels are that shallow. The drills will not find them this way. Before the year is out, a man is going to walk into a safe house outside Seoul, with testimony that makes the room go very quiet. What happens when the best intelligence the South has ever received points straight at a tunnel running beneath their own capital, and 3 years of non-stop drilling still cannot find it? Kim Il-sung is not a soldier. He is a former Workers' Party Liaison Bureau official, and in 1975 he defects to the South, and he sits down across from an interrogator, and for a long time the conversation is exactly what the debriefers expected: construction timelines, location coordinates, design modifications implemented after Tunnel 1. The interrogator's pen moves steadily. The list of rivers, the dates, new minimum depth requirements, the muck disposal protocol, excavated granite moved only in darkness, dumped in disused quarries miles from the active site, nothing visible from above. The labor rotation, conscripts pulled off shift only when their lung function deteriorated below the threshold for continued work. The security compartmentalization, no worker permitted to know the intended endpoint or the direction of the tunnel being driven. The information is controlled all the way down to the man swinging the drill steel at the coalface. The pen keeps moving. Then Kim says he personally observed 9 tunnels under simultaneous construction in different sectors along the front, and the pen slows. And then he says one of those tunnels was being driven directly at Panmunjom at the Truce Village, at the main road to Seoul, 27 miles south, a city of 10 million people, and the pen stops. South Korea begins drilling immediately. They drill for 3 years. They miss it. The tunnel is 73 meters down through solid granite. Perfectly silent. Perfectly dry. Perfectly invisible to every instrument the search teams have. The problem is geometry. Kim described the tunnel from the north looking south, from memory, from inside North Korean territory, and the angular error in his recalled bearing does not resolve into a usable targeting solution from the inverse direction. At depth, across distance, it becomes enormous in meters. Every borehole that comes up clean is a few meters off in a direction the search team cannot calculate, without information they do not possess. In one documented near approach, a borehole pulls a clean core from 2 meters above the tunnel ceiling, 2 meters of granite between the drill tip and open space, before the crew marks the location as negative and moves to the next grid point. 2 meters, the drill log records a dry, unremarkable core pull. The crew packs up. The search moves on. The tunnel sits below in total silence, its drainage slope still working, its walls still dry, exactly as designed. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Far East District expands the search operation significantly. Industrial mining rigs run in 3 shifts, 24 hours a day, along every suspected invasion corridor, the intelligence picture suggests. The grids get tighter, the boreholes multiply, the costs climb past figures that would strain most national defense budgets on their own. The silence stays total, not because the tunnel is not there, because every specification in its design was written against the exact search methodology being used. The minimum depth was not chosen at random. The muck disposal schedule was not improvised. The tunnel was engineered against the tools pointed at it, and the tools are finding nothing because the people who built the tunnel already knew which tools would be used. They cannot find it by any method currently available. But somewhere in the rock below the search grids, sealed inside a construction borehole that the North Korean crew believed was permanently closed, a piece of forgotten dynamite has been sitting in the dark since the day its fuse misfired. 6 Korean winters have passed over it. The groundwater has been working through the fracture around the casing for years. Something is going to tip the threshold. And when it does, the blast wave is going to travel up the only path available to it, a borehole the search program already marked as negative, and walked away from and reached the surface as a single tick on a recorder that almost nobody is still monitoring. What happens when that tick becomes the only thing standing between a 3-year failure and the most significant tunnel discovery in the history of the program? June 10th, 1978. 4:17 in the afternoon. A geologist monitoring a bank of old, abandoned boreholes on the western DMZ logs an anomaly on his seismic recorder. A small, sharp pulse, less than a quarter inch of displacement on the paper trace. His first thought is a tractor on the access road. He almost marks it and moves on. But the waveform is wrong. The leading edge is too steep. The decay tail is too short for any mechanical surface source. He marks it unresolved. He calls his supervisor. The Corps of Engineers confirms it within the hour. The signature of a subsurface detonation, small, distant, and not South Korean in origin. What the recorder captured was a piece of dynamite placed inside a North Korean construction borehole during the active tunneling phase, intended to break granite at depth, whose fuse misfired during the original blast sequence. The charge had been sitting sealed in its cavity through 6 Korean winters, through the freeze and the thaw and the slow chemical advance of groundwater, through the fracture around it until something tipped the threshold and completed what the fuse failed to do. The blast wave traveled up the borehole the North Korean team believed was permanently sealed, and reached the surface as one tick of a needle on one recorder that one geologist almost dismissed as road noise. The Far East District drilling team redirects every rig in the sector to the signal coordinates and does not stop for 4 months. The night shifts are the worst of it. The engines run at depth in total darkness, the cutting heads grinding against granite harder than anything the crews have encountered on the peninsula. And between core pulls, the men stand in the cold and listen to nothing, because the rock at this depth does not echo and does not respond, and the only evidence that anything exists below them is the wear pattern on the steel they pull back up. They burn through their entire annual supply budget for cutting heads in a single quarter. Replacement heads are flown in on military transport. The operation does not pause for resupply. Weeks pass, then months. Some engineers begin to wonder whether the seismic pulse was misread, whether the waveform analysis was wrong, whether 4 months of drilling and an entire annual cutting budget have been spent chasing a tractor after all. On October 17, 1978, at 10:37 in the morning, an Army engineer named Park watches a counter-rotating bit at 73 meters of depth lose all resistance and run free for 10 centimeters before the rig stops itself. He has dropped a bit into Tunnel 3, 2 kilometers from the United Nations forward base at Panmunjom, 44 kilometers from the center of Seoul. A single forced march from the suburbs of the capital. The first South Korean officer who descends the access shaft and walks into the tunnel stops within the first few hundred meters and stands still. And what stops him is not the size of it, though the size of it is significant. What stops him is the walls. Every blast hole in the granite points the same direction, north to south. Every one of them. The drill marks are forensic evidence readable by any structural engineer. This tunnel was driven from the North Korean side toward the South Korean side, meter by deliberate meter, year by year, by men who were never supposed to surface here. Today, those blast holes are highlighted in yellow paint for controlled tours. They all aim at Seoul. Then the officer looks down, and what he sees in the floor of this tunnel tells him something the blast holes never could, not just where this tunnel was going, but how long it was designed to wait before it got there. What does a floor tell you about the mind that built it, and what does that mind reveal about every tunnel nobody has found yet? The floor of Tunnel 3 is not level. It tilts. Not enough to feel in your legs as you walk, but precisely enough to matter. From the South Korean end, the floor rises at a calculated grade toward the north. Any water that enters from any source condensation on the cold walls, groundwater through microfractures, any incidental flood drains by gravity back toward North Korea. No pump, no drainage pipe, nothing is mechanical. Nothing that requires power, nothing that can fail or vibrate or produce an acoustic signature that a southern listening array positioned above might detect. The tunnel keeps itself dry through geometry alone. That geometry did not arrive at by accident. It was specified. It was designed into the original survey by someone who expected this structure to remain operational, undetected, and maintenance-free for years or decades, without making any sound at all. This is not a one-use infiltration corridor. This is permanent military infrastructure built on the explicit assumption that it will never be found. The slope is not an engineering convenience. It is a stealth feature, and it tells every engineer who walks to that floor exactly what kind of thinking produced this tunnel. The depth is 73 meters, the height of a 24-story building. Straight down, through igneous granite formed from cooling magma under conditions the surface has not seen in millions of years. North Korean soldiers cut through 1.5 kilometers of it in shifts measured in months, setting dynamite by hand, pulling broken rock out by cart on narrow-gauge tracks, producing no spoil pile visible from above because every cubic meter of excavated stone was moved in darkness and buried in quarries miles from the site. The surface above shows nothing. The ground holds no record of what happened below it. The finished cross-section is 2 meters tall and 2.1 meters wide. 3 soldiers abreast at a run. Throughput, 30,000 fully armed troops per hour. 8 hours of darkness delivers 240,000 soldiers through this single passage and into the rear of the South Korean defensive line before dawn. The entire North Korean force that crossed the 38th parallel on June 25, 1950, and started the Korean War numbered approximately 75,000. This single tunnel, in one night, delivers more than 3 times that army behind the line before sunrise. Behind the line, before anyone on the surface above knows the line has been crossed. The rock face at the southern end of Tunnel 3 shows a fresh blast pattern. Drill steel was still embedded in the wall when the tunnel was found. Whoever was working on that face had a shift scheduled the next morning. The project had a foreman, a production rate, a completion date written on a work order somewhere inside North Korea, and whoever owned that schedule did not know the tunnel had been found. The work was still open. The tunnel was still a project in progress at the moment it became evidence. When Pyongyang is informed of the discovery, they deny the tunnel exists. When South Korea releases photographs, they change the story. It is not an invasion tunnel, it is a coal mine. North Korean personnel have already coated the granite walls with black anthracite dust, brought from the surface and applied by hand across the full exposed section. South Korean journalists who tour the site in the weeks afterward find manufactured black layered over natural gray in a pattern that is recognizable to anyone who looks at it for more than a moment. Coal forms from compressed organic matter in sedimentary basins that were once shallow water environments. Granite forms from magma intruding into pre-existing rock under temperatures and pressures that would eliminate any organic material in seconds. There is no geological scenario on this planet in which coal and granite coexist in the same formation. The two substances come from mutually exclusive earth processes. The cover story is not just false, it is impossible. And the impossibility tells you something the regime did not intend to reveal. They never expected anyone to test it. The tunnel was not supposed to be found. The lie was prepared for an audience that was never supposed to exist. South Korea seals the tunnel with 3 reinforced concrete barriers and opens the southern stretch as a controlled tourist site. A visitor in a hard hat descends 265 meters down a steep concrete ramp, reaches a viewing window, and stares through reinforced glass at a corridor ending at a concrete plug 170 meters from the North Korean line. On the other side of that plug, the corridor continues into darkness that no South Korean survey team has entered. The tourists stand at the glass and look at the plug and understand, intellectually, that the tunnel continues beyond it. The plug is not the end of the tunnel. It is the end of the tour. Tunnel 3 was found because one fuse misfired, and one geologist almost marked a needle tick as road noise. That is the entire reason it was found. So what does that mean for every tunnel whose crews made no mistakes, and how many of those are still sitting in the dark right now, pointed at the same city, waiting for an order that has never come? 12 years pass with no discovery. Then, on March 3, 1990, near the eastern mountain town of Yanggu, far from Panmunjom, far from Seoul, in terrain the search program had not prioritized a borehole at 145 meters hits open space, nearly twice the depth of Tunnel 3, Tunnel 4. The dimensions match exactly: 2 by 2 meters, granite, slope-drained, north-pointing blast holes, same design language, same throughput calculation. But it is the location that takes days to fully process inside the South Korean Defense Ministry. An analyst pulls out the full map. He marks Tunnel 1 in the central sector, Tunnel 2 near Kaorwan, Tunnel 3 at Panmunjom, and now Tunnel 4, 200 kilometers to the east, in mountain terrain with no obvious urban target, and every obvious flanking value against the coastal corridor. The distribution is not a cluster around a single objective. It is a line running at the length of the border. The room is quiet for a moment before someone says what the distribution means. The tunnels are not aimed at one city. They are spread across the entire 250-kilometer front. All 10 divisions, every sector, the mountains, the paddies, the urban approaches. Every kilometer of the line that can be tunneled has been tunneled. The original order applied to the full front, and across the full front it was carried out. For the first time, North Korea does not deny the discovery. Their state newspaper publishes a statement saying the tunnel was built to facilitate peaceful reunification. It runs without irony. Now I do the arithmetic. 10 frontline divisions, each ordered to build a minimum of 2 tunnels. Minimum total, 20. Tunnels found across 50 years of intensive, technology-supported search, 4. Kim Poo-song personally observed 9 under simultaneous construction in 1974. The South Korean Ministry of National Defense's 1990 white paper uses the phrase almost impossible to describe, detecting a 2-meter passage buried hundreds of meters underground and estimates approximately 20 active tunnels in the forward zone. That number has never been revised downward in any official document published in the 35 years. The search did not produce a lower estimate. It produced no estimate that superseded the original one. Look at how the 4 were actually found. Tunnel 1. Steam escaped through a section dug too close to the surface. A construction error, corrected in every subsequent design specification. Tunnel 2. Around-the-clock industrial drilling along a known corridor, after 69 failed boreholes, at a cost that would exhaust most defense budgets. Tunnel 3. A misfired charge detonated years late and produced one seismic pulse on one recorder that one geologist almost dismissed as road noise, while a separate borehole had come within 2 meters of the ceiling and been logged as negative. Tunnel 4. Sustained drilling combined with human intelligence cultivated over more than a decade. 4 different mechanisms. None of them detection technology works as designed. Not one tunnel in 50 years was found by ground-penetrating radar. Not one by thermal imaging. Not one by acoustic monitoring. The design defeated every piece of technology the United States and South Korea have ever pointed at it. Every discovery came from one of 3 things. A soldier who saw something anomalous on the surface, a man who changed sides and talked, or a North Korean construction crew that left a flaw behind. The 4 tunnels that were found were the flawed ones, the ones dug deeper than 73 meters. The ones whose crews detonated every charge correctly and sealed every bore without error. The ones whose surveyors did not later defect and name rivers. The ones whose spoil disposal was clean and whose surface access was never crossed by a Southern patrol. Those tunnels were not flawed. And because they were not flawed, they were never found. And because they were never found, they are still there. Here is what that means in engineering terms. Every tunnel the South discovers is a complete design review of what went wrong. Every flaw made public becomes a specification update for every tunnel not yet found. The feedback loop runs backward. The more South Korea finds, the better the remaining tunnels become, because the program has been told precisely what to correct. The tunnels still underground are not the original designs. They are the correct versions. They incorporate every lesson the found tunnels taught. They were built by a program that had already been told, multiple times and in specific detail, exactly what not to do. The last South Korean defense white paper to formally estimate the number of undiscovered tunnels was published in 1990. The number was 20. It has never been revised downwardly. 35 years of additional drilling, additional defectors, additional satellite passes, additional acoustic monitoring arrays, and the official number has not moved. What that means, stated plainly, is that every instrument built to find these tunnels has failed to find them, and the people responsible for finding them have stopped claiming they will. The tunnels were built to wait. They are still waiting. The only thing that has changed since 1974 is that the city they point to now has 10 million more reasons to matter. If this story kept you up, there's another one that will finish the job. Russia built a secret assassination program so deeply buried that for decades nobody in the West could prove it existed until one man decided to expose it from the inside at a cost nobody who knew him would have predicted. That video is on screen now.